And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is the 2023 Rugby World Cup Pool C preview. Pool C, very interesting because it's pretty much the exact same Pool D of the 2019 Rugby World Cup. You're just replacing Team Portugal with Uruguay. Portugal earning their second ever Rugby World Cup appearance. So congratulations to Os Lobos. Granted, it was at the on the behalf of USA, Team USA, not being able to make it after a devastating tie with Portugal in the very last repechage qualifier for the 2023 World Cup. But congratulations again to Portugal for making their second ever Rugby World Cup. In Pool C, you have Wales, who's ranked number 10, Australia ranked number 9, Fiji, shockingly, the highest they've ever been ranked number 7. We'll get into that when I preview Fiji. Georgia, number 11, one of the top European rugby teams not in the Six Nations. And of course, as the before mentioned, Portugal, ranked number 16. Important games in this pool will be played on September 17th, Australia versus Fiji, and then September 24th, Australia versus Wales. Possibly the two top teams in this pool, but again, let's talk about Fiji when we preview them, because Fiji could easily be a upset machine in this Rugby World Cup. A lot of people are predicting Fiji possibly making it into the knockout rounds. This is one of the tougher pools to determine because it's not just, especially within the last month or so, it's not just Wales and Australia that are going to dominate this. Fiji can easily be a upset machine, and so could Georgia. So let's preview these teams. First of all, let's talk about Wales. Wales head coach Warren Gatland came in as a coach in 2022, replacing Wayne Pivac in between the World Cup cycle. As I mentioned before, usually in the rugby world, coaches come in at the beginning of every rugby cycle. So right after the Rugby World Cup, a new coach comes in for 4 years in hopes of progressing further or winning the Rugby World Cup, depending who the team is, doing better than what the last regime did. If they do great, they might get re-signed for another 4 years. If they don't, then they'll end their 4-year contract and then go find a new rugby coach. Warren Gatland came in kind of in the middle, like I said, replacing Wayne Pivac. This is actually his second go as coach of Wales. His first time, he led Wales to the semifinals in the 2011 Rugby World Cup and the 2019 Rugby World Cup, as well as between his reign as head coach from 2007 to 2019, 3 Six Nation titles, including 3 Grand Slams, which means he pretty much swept the entire competition. Wales has not been able to repeat that feat since having Warren Gatland as coach. So bringing back head coach Warren Gatland could possibly give Wales that shot in the arm that they're looking for. The last couple of games that Wales played, September 5th, they lost to England 20-9. They defeated England 20-9. Now, granted, England not exactly the best team that they could be right now. There's a lot going on. If you watch the preview video I make about England, I'll go more into detail on that. And then on September 12th, they lost to England in the rematch, 19-17, very, very close game. And then September 19th, the last game that they played before heading into the Rugby World Cup, they lost to South Africa 52-16. Not a great showing from Wales, but South Africa definitely a team going into the competition with a little bit of head of steam behind them. Wales is missing a huge factor on their team. Longtime coach Alan Wynne-Jones announcing his retirement from international competition. So big shoes to fill. Obviously, Wales will have to look towards their veteran players. No further than captain right now, Dan Biggar, fly half with 109 caps under his belt. This is going to be his 3rd World Cup under his international career. Then, of course, you have George North, 114 caps, center for Wales. This is going to be his 4th Rugby World Cup, so a lot of veteran experience there. Then, of course, Toby Taulupe Falaton with 100 caps. It's also going to be his fourth Rugby World Cup. He is the prop for Wales. Third most caps by any player in Wales as a Welsh international representative. Then, of course, you do have some really exciting young players on this Welsh team. Luis Reeves-Zammit, a very, very exciting winger. He's played a lot in European competitions. He is an exciting Welsh player, as well as, of course, Josh Adams, who's always been consistent. And then another veteran on the Welsh team, Lee Halfpenny, 100 caps to his name. This is only going to be his third Rugby World Cup because he did miss the 2015 competition. Last time that Wales was in the Rugby World Cup, as I mentioned before, they were in the semifinal. They were the top of this pool, which means, a lot, considering, like I said, basically every team was in this pool, was in the same pool last Rugby World Cup, except for Portugal. So Wales defeated Australia, Fiji, Georgia in last year's Rugby World Cup, made their way to the semifinals, unfortunately losing at the end to the eventual winners, South Africa, and then eventually losing the third place game to New Zealand 40-17. Though the loss to South Africa was only by a field goal, 19-16. So again, Wales had a really, really great run last Rugby World Cup. Unfortunately, head coach Wayne Pivac decided there's a lot of issues about him coaching leading up to this next World Cup. So what better replacement than Warren Gatland to come in to regain the reins and hopefully bring Wales back to the semifinals or even further into this 2024 Rugby World Cup. Now let's go on to Australia, who at one time was pretty high favored to make it to the finals. Ranked number 9, they are a two-time Rugby World Cup champion. Eddie Jones is the new head coach of Australia, just coming in at the beginning of the year. There has been a lot of controversy with his coming in as the coach of Australia, replacing Dave Rennie, who was having issues himself. Eddie Jones is the former head coach of course, the England team, which is where he made his name, as well as Team Japan, where, of course, he made his name during the 2015 Rugby World Cup, where Japan had the very famous Miracle in Brighton. Eddie Jones was the mastermind of that miracle upset, Japan upsetting South Africa. First time that Japan has ever defeated a huge team on one of the biggest stages in rugby. So Eddie Jones has a lot of stout in his name, but unfortunately, since coming on as the head coach of Australia, a lot of scrutiny. Last couple of games they played, September 5th, they lost to New Zealand 23-20, not so bad. But then September 27th, they lost to France 41-17. Also, they did not win a game during the Rugby Championship, which is the big Southern Hemisphere competition between Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Argentina. First time in a long time that Australia did not win an entire game under new head coach Eddie Jones' regime. So Eddie Jones having quite a bit of scrutiny since becoming head coach. Also big scrutiny with the announcement of the roster, the omission of longtime coach Michael Hooper, who is a phenomenal player. Granted, Michael Hooper has been playing quite a bit of rugby, so his career is winding down, but it was very, very shocking to a lot of Wallaby fans that Michael Hooper was not part of this roster. There is now talk that Michael Hooper might be making the transition over to Australian sevens play, rugby sevens play rather than 15s, which will be exciting because as a sevens fan, love Michael Hooper, love to see him play as a sevens player, but it is really puzzling that you omit a great player and a great leader and a veteran leader like Michael Hooper off of the roster. So, of course, without Michael Hooper, you got to look towards your veterans who are going to be on the roster to kind of lead the staff. You have to, of course, look to new captain Will Skelton, who's captain of Australia for this Rugby World Cup. He is playing the lock position. James Shipper, the most test matches under his cap as a Wallaby on the current roster at 131. This is going to be his fourth Rugby World Cup. So a lot of experience there. Now, unfortunately, that's kind of where it stops. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty, especially in the backfield with your wingers and your corners. Samu Karevi, who is an experienced and exciting player, is coming back to the Wallabies, but he is coming off of a major injury. Marika Korabeti is also coming back from an injury as well. Depth issues is starting to face Australia at the fullback position. They only have one announced fullback on the roster. That's Andrew Callaway. If he goes down, you're going to have to do a lot of shifting around with some people that might not be 100%. So that's not good. Your fly halves are all super, super young. Carter Gordon, Ben Donaldson are getting the starts. Both of them have a combined 8 international caps under their career as Wallabies, so that's not good either. Your fly half, your scrum half, again, if you're new to rugby, are basically like your quarterbacks. You kind of want an experienced fly half and scrum half, and you definitely want an experienced hooker or prop to kind of shore up the front line. If you don't, that's really, really questionable strategy for this Australian team. And again, the omissions too on this roster. You don't have a Reece Hodge, you don't have a James O'Connor, you don't have a Quade Cooper, Tom Bank, Tom Wright. A lot of really experienced players. Now, granted, some of them are hurt. Some of them, there is a little bit of controversy between their standings with the Australian Rugby Union, but it's the World Cup. You would think Australia would want to man the best roster that they can in this competition. And so far, the results are kind of showing it right now. Like I mentioned before, no wins in this year's Rugby Championship, the devastating loss to France, and then, of course, a loss to New Zealand, which is really not that big a deal, but it's going to be tough. And as I get into the next 2 teams, there could be some upsets, and I'm definitely looking at Australia to possibly take the losses to these next 2 teams. Number 7, Fiji. This is the team, and rugby, if you've been paying attention to my videos with the Major League Rugby, rugby is a game of momentum, and I don't think there is a hotter team going into this tournament, into this cup, than the Flying Fijians, who have jumped up in the last month all the way to number 7, the highest they've ever been ranked in the Rugby World Rankings. It is great to see a team that's been kind of on the outs of the Tier 1, maybe upper Tier 2 nation competition, but they've definitely been knocking on that door, and this Rugby World Cup could be a chance for them to prove their point that they deserve to be in the upper echelon of competitions, just like how Japan and Italy have done it in previous Rugby World Cups. But let's go into the Flying Fijians at number 7. Head coach is Simon Raiwalui, who also co-manages Stade Francais, which is a very competitive French club. Simon kind of came in at the very last second to become the new head coach of Fiji, replacing Vern Cotter in February of this year. So even though not a lot of time to kind of establish his culture, establish the way that he likes to coach, but like I said, the results have spoken for themselves, because Fiji has been on a tear. First of all, back in August 5th, they defeated Japan 35-12. Now, granted, there was a red card that came into that game very early, so Japan was a man down. But 35-12, even when I was watching that game, Fiji was very, very impressive, flying like their namesake, hitting really, really hard. Fiji, for rugby, is known more primarily for their Fiji Sevens players because of their combination of speed and hard hitting. But they haven't had too much success on the 15s playing field. But now, this year, they're really racking up some scalps. Granted, August 19th, they lost to France 34-17, though France is a very heavy favorite to win this Rugby World Cup. But then August 26th, a big win for Fiji, defeating England for the very first time ever, 30-22. And honestly, that score doesn't reflect how dominant Fiji was in that actual game. So big win for Fiji. Again, Fiji coming into this competition full of momentum, full of hype. A lot of people, a lot of experts are claiming that Fiji could get out of the pool stages into the knockout rounds. Remember, the top 2 teams will go from the pool stages to the final 8 knockout round. And again, like I said, when it first started, when these pools were set up, everybody thought it was going to be Wales and Australia, just like last time. Again, this pool was just like Pool D in 2019. Wales and Australia advanced that time. Fiji could pull off the upset and end up being one of the 2 teams to go up. And again, the way Australia is looking, Fiji could easily take them down in the Rugby World Cup. Last year, let's talk about that though. Fiji probably wouldn't want to really reflect about last year because that was last year. But last year, in the same pool, they went 1-3, losing to Australia, losing to Wales, but they did defeat Georgia 45-10. So actually, the Georgia-Fiji game might be kind of interesting to watch because Georgia is still Georgia. They've become pretty competitive too, but Fiji, they might have gone up another level, so we'll see. As for the roster themselves, star players to look out for: Sam Matavesi, who is their talented hooker, 27 caps. Their back row has Levani Botia and Viliamai Mata, and then of course Semi Radradra, center, who plays for the Bristol Bears over in the European competition. Really, really fun, exciting player to watch. Caleb Muntz is their young fly half. Only 4 international caps, but when he played against Japan, man, he is clutch. He can make any kick. He made a 50-meter penalty kick, which was really, really impressive. He is definitely going to play a factor in this Rugby World Cup. Then, of course, you also have Simone Crovoli, their very young scrum half. And then, of course, their captain, Waisea Nayakalev, who has 35 caps, plays also for Toulon Rugby Club in France. A lot of experience there. And then Frank Lomani, another very talented scrum half. He scored 2 tries against Japan in their game. He's definitely, again, going to play a big factor for Fiji. Moving on, number 11, Georgia. As I mentioned before, the best European rugby team that's not in the Six Nations. Again, the Six Nations are pretty much all your Tier 1 European rugby teams. England, France, Scotland, Wales, Italy, and Ireland. Georgia is not part of the Six Nations competition, but, the way that they play, there's always been an argument for them to be able to get up into Six Nations competition. Georgia plays in the second tier European competition, the Rugby European Championship, which they are 16-time champion. They are currently on a 6 championship win streak. Just to show some perspective, the next highest winning team in that competition is Romania, who only has 5 championships. But as I mentioned before, Georgia just won their 16th, their 6th straight championship. So Georgia definitely, again, a pretty high caliber team. Like I've mentioned before about Japan and then, of course, Italy, both those teams have arguably earned Tier 1 ranking. Georgia has always been kind of knocking on the door, saying that with Fiji as well, but Georgia has been there longer. So again, Georgia could easily make some upsets in this competition, especially with the way that Australia's been playing. Wales hasn't exactly been rock steady either. So let's go into the Georgia team. The Lilos, which a team which was established in 1964, but did not get rugby union membership until 1992. So a very, very young, in the grand perspective of rugby, a very young team. Lilos is the Georgian word for a field, because rugby, when it was introduced, was very similar to a Georgian game called Lilo Berti. Lilo, again, is the field in that name, so Georgians are called the Lilos. The team is called the Lilos. Their head coach is Livan Masashvili. And again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing a lot of these names, but Livan Masashvili, who was actually the assistant coach in 2019 when Georgia was in the Rugby World Cup, and then promoted to head coach after that to lead them into this next rugby cycle. Now, granted, last time that they were in the Rugby World Cup, they were 1 for 3. Losing to Wales, losing to Fiji, losing to Australia, but they did defeat Uruguay, the other team that was in this competition. So, Georgia obviously hoping to do better this season. Now, of course, last couple of games for Georgia, they've been pretty much on a tear. As I mentioned before, they won the Rugby European Championship. Also, too, in August 12th, they defeated Romania 56-6. August 19th, they defeated the United States in 22-7. Now, granted, that game was a lot closer than people expected, so kind of questionable to see how Georgia plays because it was a little lackluster against USA. And then August 26th, their last game before the Rugby World Cup starts, they lost to Scotland 33-6. So Georgia maybe trying to gain some momentum. They're definitely going to have to rely a lot on some of their players. It is a young team. There's very few veteran players. The most experienced players, Mirab Sharikaze, who is their captain, 93 caps as a center, and Alexander Todua, who is the winger at 103 caps. Their fullback, Lasha Kanaze, 95 caps at the fullback. So most of their experience is in the back half of the team. Their front, their props and their props and their back row are all pretty young. Though there is a very talented fullback, David Nishiavili, 21 years old, guy that you should probably look out for. And of course, their winger, Akaki Tabutsadze, who has been scoring some pretty impressive tries, especially against Team USA. And then Luka Matkava, their fly half. Again, another clutch player for a very young team, but a very, very young team that could make some noise if Fiji, Australia, and Wales are not careful. Then, of course, we get into Portugal, the lowest ranking team in this pool, the only team that wasn't in Pool D in the 2019 Rugby World Cup. They're ranked number 16, Os Lobos. This is only their second Rugby World Cup ever. Their first appearance in the Rugby World Cup was in 2007, which surprisingly was also in France. Unfortunately, in that Rugby World Cup, they did not win a single game. They were completely swept. Their head coach is Patrice Laquisette, who is actually a French rugby player, former French rugby player, as well as was the French backs coach in 2012-2015, left the French rugby program, and then popped up in Portugal in 2019. The last couple of games that Portugal played, August 12th, they defeated the United States 46-20, which was the rematch from tying with Team USA in the repechage competition that allowed them to take the last spot in this rugby competition. If USA was able to pull off the win, they would be in this pool instead of Portugal. But in the rematch, August 12th, Portugal kind of proved that they belong here by dominating. It was a real landslide for Portugal. They defeated the United States 46-20. But then on the 26th, their last game before heading into the Rugby World Cup, they lost to Australia A, which is kind of like the bench or the second line, the freshmen of the Australia team, not the starters. They lost 30-17, just to show you again the difference in abilities between a Tier 1 team like Australia and Portugal. A couple of key players for Portugal, their winger Rodrigo Marta, who scored 2 tries against the United States in their rematch. Thomas Appleton, their team captain. Man, that guy, he really won me over in the rematch game with USA because he was everywhere. A guy plays really hard. You could tell that the other boys really respect him. The most experienced player with 61 caps, plays at center. And then you have Samuel Marquez and Jose Lima. Samuel Marquez is the scrum half. Jose Lima is the center. Second most experienced on the team with 54 caps. So that is Pool C. Again, as I mentioned before, some of these pools are really, really going to be tricky to figure out. Again, a lot of people are predicting Fiji might be one of the 2 teams that goes on. As I mentioned, the Australia-Fiji game is going to be really, really important in determining which of those 2 move on. Wales, like I said, hasn't necessarily been rock city, but with the return of head coach Warren Gatlin, it could change everything. Australia and Eddie Jones, they are the team I feel has the most to prove, as well as has the least momentum. Fiji has the most momentum going to this World Cup. I think Australia and England have like the least. They're limping into the Rugby World Cup. And with Australia, it really is because of the controversy surrounding Eddie Jones. They have a young team. Man, it's really, really tempting. It's really, really tempting to pick Fiji over Australia. And Georgia could be that factor too, because Georgia could beat any of these teams at any given day. And a loss or a draw with Georgia could really affect the outcome of which two teams end up moving on. I'm gonna go with Wales and with Fiji. I feel Eddie Jones. There's something about that relationship with Eddie Jones in Australia that's just not. As a lot of people thought it was a really good fit, and I don't think it is. I don't think it's working out. So Fiji and Wales are going to be my picks to go on in Pool C. And again, don't forget, guys, you can watch every game live and on demand if you're in the United States on the Peacock Network. Peacock Network also home to the HSBC Rugby Sevens competition, which is always fun to watch, as well as the Premiership Rugby, which is one of the top competitions in Europe. A lot of players on these teams play in the Premiership, so a lot of rugby can be found on the Peacock, as well as, obviously all the other shows that are shown on NBC and Peacock. WWE Network is on the Peacock, so Peacock is a great deal to get, and especially if you're a rugby fan or if you really want to just try to invest into the Rugby World Cup. I mean, that's how I got into it, through sevens, through the 2015 Rugby World Cup with Japan. Not a bad thing to check out. So again, live and on demand, Peacock, the Rugby World Cup starts this Friday. Again, big games to watch in Pool C. September 17th, Australia versus Fiji. September 24th, Australia versus Wales. I feel Wales and Fiji are going to go on into the knockout stages. As always, thank you very much for watching my video, and I'll see you on the pitch.